All right, good morning to many of you and good afternoon for many of us. My name is Diane Quest and I'm the Chief External Affairs Officer at Points of Light, and it is my pleasure to welcome you and set the stage before handing the reins over to my colleague Jenny Lawson, Chief Civic Innovation Officer, and to our panelists. So welcome and thank you for joining us for this webinar, Examining the State of American Civic Engagement, the Path Forward for Business and Nonprofits to Inspire Service and Volunteerism. The conversation today will draw on the report that Points of Light just released in September, led by Hart Research in partnership with Carol Cohn on Purpose and with support from AT&T. That report is titled Civic Life Today, a look at American civic engagement amid a global pandemic. In 2018, Points of Light went through a strategic planning process, and as we were approaching the organization's 30th anniversary in 2020, we knew it was time to develop a plan for the future. For nearly 30 years, Points of Light had focused on volunteering, asking one question: how do we get more people to volunteer? Still an important question, but looking at the world we live in today and what our stakeholders need us to be to help drive social change now and in the future, our strategic planning process yielded a new question. How do we create a society where it is easy for people to lead, lend support, and take action on causes they care about? This led to the creation of the Civic Circle and a broader focus for Points of Light to look at the individual as a volunteer, as well as someone who has many opportunities to be civically engaged. The research, Civic Life Today, provides us with data and insights as we now move forward down this path. So before we dive into the substance today, we actually would really love to hear from you. And I promise this is not a test to see if you've read the research, but we do have a poll and want to get your answer to a pretty simple question, which is, how do you think a person's pre-pandemic level of engagement will change after the pandemic passes? Will they do more? Will they do about the same? Or will they do less? I'm going to give it about 30 seconds for everyone to answer, and then we will share those results. So think about that for a moment, and if you haven't read the research, take your best wild guess. If you have read through the research, you might remember one of our answers touching on this. So we'll give it a few more seconds. All right, so I am going to ask that we now share those poll results. So a good 56% said that they will do more, which tells me that either you're really smart and you can see into the future, or you might have browsed through the research. 31% they will do the same, and 13% they will do less. I think the intention is that people are going to want to be more engaged. I think our challenge is going to be that we call them to that action and provide them those opportunities to be engaged. So thank you for participating in the poll. So today we are fortunate to be joined by three speakers. The first will be Jay Campbell, who is a partner at Hart Research. He conducts research in all of the firm's major practice areas, which include political, nonprofit and advocacy, media, corporate, and labor. For a decade, he managed Hart Research's regular polling for NBC News and the Wall Street Journal. And he currently does the same for CNBC's All America Economic Survey, which is a quarterly poll on economics and personal finance. We'll also be joined after Jay by two panelists facilitated by Jenny Lawson. The first is Carol Cohn. Carol is the founder of Carol Cohn on Purpose, and she is internationally recognized for her work in social purpose and corporate social responsibility. For more than 25 years, she has embraced a steadfast commitment to building lasting partnerships between companies, brands, and social issues for deep business and societal impact. And she firmly believes that companies and brands must have a deeper meaning beyond the bottom line. You're surely aware of her work, even if you might not know that. She has led projects such as the Avon Breast Cancer Crusade, My Special Aflac Duck, and the American Heart Association Go Red campaign. And Natalye Paquin, as the president and CEO of Points of Light, Natalye is our fearless leader. She is a visionary and results-oriented leader with a strong track record of performance and transformation in turnaround and high-paced organizations, having served as the Chief Transformation Officer at the Girl Scouts of the USA, the Chief Executive Officer of the Girl Scouts of Eastern Pennsylvania, and as the Chief Operating Officer of the Kimmel Center for Performing Arts. Natalie began her career as a civil rights attorney and worked with the U.S. Department of Education Office for Civil Rights before working in education in the Chicago and Philadelphia public school systems. So with that, it is my pleasure to turn it over now to Jay Campbell to share just a slice of some of the data and insights from the Civic Engagement Report. Jay.
Thank you very much, Diane. Thank you all for having me. It was a pleasure to work with Points of Light and with Carol Cohn on this research, and I'm very gratified to be presenting it to everyone today. If we could go to the first slide of showing the methodology, please. What we did in this research was two components. Most recently, we did an online survey of U.S. adults. We talked to just over 1,400 in total, and that included, by the way, additional oversample interviews of those in the Gen Z and millennial generations. We had 300 to 400 in each one of those generations. They were not overrepresented in the results, but it was really important for Points of Light to take a look at those two generations in depth. And so we wanted to make sure we had a really solid sample of each one to be able to reliably analyze. And as you'll see shortly, it was particularly important that we were able to do that with Gen Z adults, given how they feel about many of the issues and that we asked about and how they behave on a civic engagement level. That survey was actually preceded by in-depth qualitative research with members of those same two generations. We did two online focus groups on the Qualboard platform back in the end of March and early April, where we covered many of the same topics that we did in the survey, but we're able to get behind the numbers we eventually collected and really understand in a better way how young people, millennials and Gen Z, view civic engagement, the barriers, the motivations, a lot of which then we used to develop the survey quantitative questionnaire, and ended up with a really important and interesting set of results. So let's get into it. First, we're going to talk a little bit about how people are engaging in the civic space and why they're doing so. On the next slide, we'll get into this in more depth in a few minutes, but we found that people are in fact engaging on a range of different actions. Most commonly and most popularly, those who are registered to vote, 72% of them said that they voted in all or most elections for which they've been eligible in the past couple of years. A majority say that they've donated to a nonprofit organization. Over 40% say that they've signed a petition in the past year, or that they've made decisions on products based on company social responsibility. We'll talk more about that. And then, as Diane Quest said in her introduction, Points of Light's major focus when it comes to volunteering, about a third, just over a third, said that they participated in some sort of volunteer engagement or activity during the course of the past year. That includes, by the way, 15% who say that they do so regularly, once a month or more. We had other items on the list too, which I'll show you in a little bit, but you can see from this list, there's plenty of room for growth in the volunteer space, quite a bit of it, in fact. And I think what we learned and what I'll demonstrate is that there's a lot of opportunity to light that spark and engage, get people to engage on a volunteer level. We did, on the next slide, do talk about COVID a little bit. Of course, we were in the field with the survey just as the pandemic was breaking, and the same with the qualitative research. But really, we found that it galvanized people's thinking around civic engagement and around civic responsibility. 4 of the actions that I just mentioned, majorities, very large majorities, in fact, say are going to be even more important in the post-coronavirus era. That 78% said voting. They agree that voting will be more important. That includes 54% who strongly agree that voting will be more important. That was much higher than the strong agreement for any of these other items. And it's really a sign of the high motivation we're seeing this year on a political level. My firm does a substantial amount of political polling. And it's really, this is entirely consistent with what we're seeing elsewhere and what I'm sure many of you seen reported in public polls, that people are really excited and interested in the election and ready to get out there and vote. We also see that on the right-hand side, a majority say that they're going to maintain their current involvement or do even more on a civic level when the pandemic passes. In fact, virtually everybody says that. Nobody says, statistically, nobody says that they're going to be doing less. And really, I think what this shows us is that COVID put a pretty fine point on the need to look out for and help one another, and that's really motivated Americans to do so. As such, we can see on the next slide, Americans really are holding themselves and each other accountable when it comes to creating positive change, when it creates to getting involved. 82% agree that we must all get involved to rebuild our communities in the country after COVID-19. 2/3 agree that the coronavirus will have a long-lasting positive impact. And you look at that, and on the far right, from another survey that Edelman conducted around the same time we were in the field, about 2/3 actually see a little bit of a sense of silver lining that COVID may lead to positive changes in how we deal with one another. So both in how we interact on a personal basis and how we sort of get involved to make a difference for one another, people do anticipate that this is going to make a difference for them. Before we move on from this, I do want to say that from the two pies on the left-hand side, it's not that all of the rest disagree with those statements. In fact, only 3% disagree that we must all get involved, and only 11% disagree that there will be long-term positive impact. The balance just sort of gave a neutral response, but the negative thinking around this was, and I believe remains quite low. So taking a step back, COVID aside, we wanted to get an understanding of why people get involved. Why do they take the actions and what do they want to achieve by doing so? We gave people 5 choices in the survey in terms of what kind of outcomes from civic engagement they'd like to see. I'd actually like to start on the right-hand side. The notion of just quote unquote giving back, 1 in 5 people chose it, but in many ways it's kind of an antiquated notion. At this point, it really is much more about the 3 on the left, particularly helping people at 59%. And then almost half saying creating positive change, and just over 40% say making a difference. These are the ways in which that Americans are thinking about the need to make a change. I would say that that helping people point was actually the top motivation for each generation that we looked at in the survey. That said, creating positive change was actually, for Gen Z, tied with helping people. There's a real focus on positive change. And, you know, you got to remember, we conducted this research, all of it, prior to the killing of George Floyd and prior to the nationwide protests for racial justice that ensued from that event. But I think we had a preview here in the strong desire for change within the youngest adult generation of Americans. And it really manifests itself again and again throughout the rest of the survey. So that's all at a societal level. On the next slide, we can look a little bit more at the individual level thinking that people are most apt to take action for personal fulfillment and to make things better in their own communities. We gave a whole host of motivations that people could choose from, and they could select multiple motivations because nobody is motivated by just one thing. The top choices, though, with 1/3 or more choosing them, included enriching my life, bringing me joy, paying it forward, the idea which was extremely popular in the qualitative research. A lot of people talked about wanting to take their own advantages in life and try to give advantages to others. And then others such as setting an example for the young and improving my own local community were particularly important as well. That setting example for young people was really central to the parents in our qualitative research. Many of them talked about taking their children out to do service days and explaining why it's important to help their communities and to help their fellow citizens. On the right-hand side, still a number that were particularly important, but far less so. Really, things like direct personal benefits, it's a factor for some, but much less so than the items on the left. So if you look at emotional health and reduced stress, yes, 29% say that's important. Learning new things, 23% say that was important to them. The very bottom of the list, helping their own careers. It's not that nobody chooses these, but clearly the focus that people have at this point is on fulfillment on a self level rather than direct personal benefit. And I think that that's encouraging to see and important from the perspective of being able to engage people long term. So I mentioned we did a lot of looking at Gen Z. In the next set of slides, we're going to look a little bit more specifically and closely at that group and see how they are similar or different from other generations. This next slide is actually my favorite one in the entire presentation, where we took each generation and we sort of map them for the types of activities that they are participating in. This included those I mentioned at the beginning, as well as several others. In total, there are 10 areas of engagement here. And what you'll see, the yellow dot representing Gen Z, on 7 of the 10 areas of engagement, Gen Z has the highest level and highest rates of involvement. It's particularly high, or at least the gap is particularly large on the 3rd item down, purchase decisions based on a company's social responsibility. And then the 4th up from the bottom, also corporate related, considering applying or taking a job because of company social responsibility. We'll get more into that in just a moment. But Gen Z really is an active and engaged generation, which I think will probably surprise exactly nobody on this phone, on this call. The 2 items where this was flipped, where the oldest generation of boomers and the silent generation were the most active, are donating money to a nonprofit at the top and voting in elections at the bottom. You got to remember that many of Gen Z only recently became eligible to vote, many of the adults we spoke to, so this was a little less applicable to them overall. That said, there is still plenty of room for growth there, and it's an important area for growth. And of course, they have far less disposable income than do boomers or members of the silent generation, or for that matter, Gen X or millennials, which is then again not surprising that they're a little less apt to have donated to a nonprofit, though still around 45% of Gen Z say they have done so. So what are the issues that people want to start to make change in? We gave a range of potential issues for people could be interested, quite a large list. We've just shown the top ones here. And the reason that these are important, number one, mental health comes out toward the top of the list overall, but particularly with that Gen Z generation. Look at that, 52%, a majority of Gen Z say that mental health is an important issue to them. It was also one of the top issues for millennials, but substantially lower than Gen Z at 36%. Poverty is also extremely important, as is the environment. And, you know, you look at environment and race relation, gives a real sort of sense of how focused Gen Z are. They were the only generation for which the environment and race relations were in the top tier of 5 or 6 issues. For no other generation did those particular issues come in the top tier. And again, I'll reiterate on the race relations item, this is actually before the protests and before the activism post George Floyd's killing, and the activation that many people felt at this point. So this was clearly really key to them. And, you know, there's a little bit of crossover here with another survey. 79% of those in Gen Z since that time have actually taken efforts to address racial discrimination or inequality. So that brings us to the next wave of engagement, as it's being called here. Businesses and others must gotta get ready for this new generation. We actually have, if you count from those items that I showed, 10 items that I showed a while ago, 39% of adults overall have engaged in the past year in 5 or more of them. 28% have engaged in 3 to 4 of them. That brings us up to 67% of Gen Z. I'm sorry, those were the Gen Z numbers. So 2 out of 3 Gen Z have done 3 or more activities compared to 52% of adults overall. That's a lot of engagement among a highly enthusiastic generation. And then on the right-hand side, you know, 3 out of 4 Gen Z, slightly higher than adults overall, say that they need to be able to witness the outcomes of their actions. That's a key and important thing for everyone, but particularly for the young folks. but even much more so, they're much more likely to use social media. I know that this is going to rock everybody's world to hear that Gen Z is more engaged on social media on these items than our older generations, but it's really quite a large gap, and it's still striking to see. I said we were going to talk a little bit about the corporate aspect here, and the importance that people, Americans, ascribe to the corporate role. Starting with another number from that Edelman Trust Barometer survey, 68% agree that companies can take actions that will both increase their profits and increase improvement in communities where they operate. You know, what this tells us here is CSR efforts and profits are not an either or proposition in people's minds. It's really more of a both and proposition, and it's a true expectation that that companies will engage in these activities. And, you know, Americans place the onus on companies in a number of different ways. It could be everything from treating employees well with pay and benefits and paid sick leave. Really, more than anything, this is table stakes. 55% say that that's an essential step for corporations to take, and another 32% say it's pretty important. So everyone really sort of feels that that is the base minimum. And then it can go all the way down to executives themselves participating in volunteer activities alongside rank and file. When we did the qualitative research, a lot of people, and it's reflected here as well, said it was important for companies to give people time off to help their communities and participate in volunteer activities. But what the respondents in our qualitative research told us that would be really interesting to them and really show a company's commitment is if the executives, the leadership of the company, are participating in those volunteer activities as well, which is why we decided to include it in the survey, and I'm really glad we did. They literally want to see leadership get their hands dirty when it comes to volunteer engagement and civic engagement by corporations. And there is a financial aspect of this as well for corporations. Fully 2 in 5 adults say that they have made decisions on products based on a company's social responsibility, whether that's to purchase those products or not purchase those products. And it goes up to 3 in 5 for Gen Z. That's a lot of consumer power, either occurring now or waiting to occur later. You know, and those groups, that 41% of adults who say that they've done this, they're more active and engaged than the average adult overall too. You can see from the right-hand side of the slide, they are more likely to have engaged in each one of these activities than adults overall, particularly on signing a petition. Almost half of them have participated in volunteer activities versus 36% of adults overall. So this is a group that you don't want to get on the wrong side of, because they are involved in their communities. And again, have this expectation that corporations will behave properly as well. And then on the hiring and employee level, this I thought was fascinating on the next slide. And that's the degree to which people are using social responsibility, companies' social responsibility as a decision point for whether they want to work for that company or not. Overall, it's 18% of adults, which doesn't seem like a lot, but that's nearly 1 out of 5 people say that they've considered applying for or taking a job from a company specifically because they believe in its commitment to social responsibility. And it goes way up, it doubles, more than doubles for Gen Z. So their expectation is not only on the behavior of the corporation, but it's sort of driving their employment decisions and whether they want to be affiliated with that company or not. And then again, that 18% of adults who have done this are more engaged on a number of spots, not on every activity the way the previous group was, but you look at the participation in volunteer activities, it goes through the roof at 63% with that highly engaged 18% of the public. They're much more likely by more than 2 to 1 to have attended a rally or a demonstration. So again, the groups that are doing these sort of activities related to corporations have a high degree of focus sort of across the board when it comes to civic engagement. Finally, we have a set of slides here about how we can nurture the desire for people to get involved and channel it into helping organizations who help others. This is sort of where the rubber hits the road for Points of Light here. And a key step is really leaning into their desire for personal fulfillment and personal connection. We gave respondents in the survey pairs of characteristics for a volunteer engagement and asked which they would prefer to be involved with. And a pretty clear picture emerges. The strongest preference overall is for issues that directly impact their own community as opposed to global issues by a 37-point margin. That's a huge preference there. And still by 2 to 1, they want to interact directly with the people who are benefiting from the help as opposed to not interacting directly. This really is a personal connection that people want to make. And again, many, particularly in Gen Z, want to be able to see the outcomes of what they're doing. And then the preferences go on, and you can see down toward the bottom, activities where I help groups of people, activities I can do on a regular basis. Both of those items really speak to the desire for broader change and impact rather than sort of more discrete efforts to help people one-on-one or just sort of do a one and done. And I would point out that those who express the strongest interest in volunteering, they're even more likely to say that they want to help groups of people and do so on a regular basis. So that's where the sort of energy is at this point. Just a couple more slides to show what's stopping people from volunteering more. This is obviously a pretty important question. A few people say it's a matter of not having enough time or other things being quite honest and saying there's other things they would rather do when they have free time. But really, if you look at the items that stretch across the top, the most common answers, many of the most common answers are essentially, I don't know how, whether it's I'm unsure how to get involved or where to find opportunities. I can't find opportunities near me. I don't know how I can help or what I can do to be helpful. I haven't found opportunities that match my own personal skills and ability. People really need help engaging. And you'll note the least possible, a positive response here, a popular response rather, is at the bottom, I don't believe my efforts will make a difference. There really is very little sense of being able to make, not being able to make a difference. It's really much more about needing guidance and help to make a difference. And that's where people can be motivated and helped the most. Lastly, people not only want to be involved in their communities, they want to do so, get involved in a communal fashion, which I think is pretty interesting. We asked people what would make them more likely to volunteer in activities. The top 2 responses are being invited to volunteer by a friend at 64%, and 56% said volunteering with family. Also particularly important here, is at 53% having a single online mobile site to find opportunities and track impact. Similarly, learning the physical and mental health benefits of volunteering, having an app to track those things. These are sort of can show where there's a clear role for organizations like Points of Light to enable and educate potential volunteers going forward. And you'll note also there's a particularly nice synergy there on the mental health piece, given how important for Gen Z, for adults overall, but really for Gen Z in particular, that was for them as an issue. That will do it for my slides, and I believe I will be passing it to Jenny Lawson at this point.
That's right, Jay. Thanks so much, and thanks for such a thoughtful analysis of the research. Jay, I think if you can mute yourself now, we can go to different speaker. Good. So hi, everybody. This is Jenny Lawson, Chief Civic Innovation Officer at Points of Light. We are incredibly grateful to our partners at Hart Research for helping us make this an interesting and robust survey and providing us framework for conversations not only today, but in the months ahead. So we look forward to continuing to unpack this research. But today I am beyond excited to be able to take a little deeper dive with my friend Carol Cohn and my boss, Natalye Paquin, and really, you know, we've been all of us sitting with this research now since May, and oftentimes we'll Monday morning back and forth have this, you know, I was reading the research. Did you get that it said, so let's answer that question. And Carol, I'll start with you. when you finally got to sit with the research for a while, what was the biggest takeaway for you?
Well, first, I'd just like to commend Points of Light for doing the most comprehensive current piece of research on what is happening in terms of engagement. And I also believe that this approach, this civic circle approach, that this is not just about volunteering, which is so important. And obviously there's a long way to go because we can have more people volunteering, but all the other ways that people want to get engaged, that is a critical finding. And then that everyone on the call plays a role in civic engagement. And of course, we see with the elections this year that voting, we trust, is just through the roof. No matter what side you're on, people truly are getting engaged. But think about taking that action and accelerating it around the civic circle.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think that's, certainly what Points of Light really hopes to happen, is that people start to understand all the ways that they can engage civically. And so, Natalie, when you looked at the research, what did it say for you?
Sure. Thanks, Jenny, and thanks, Carol, for joining us, and thanks for being our partner on this journey. I think there were a couple of things that really stood out to me. The first is that Generation Z, they are an active generation, and they are not going to accept the world as we are delivering it to them. They are determined to make a difference and determined to get engaged. And I think the second point that that really stood out to me was the fact that, Generation Z, they want to do good, but they also are just totally an active group. They're totally an active group. So, our sector, I think, has a role to play. And I think that is really important, where we are so used to a dismantling of hierarchies. I think what the research said, and it was in one of the later points, was that they are looking for all people who want to participate. They're looking for support, and that means that there is a role for CSR professionals, there's a role for nonprofits, and there's also a role for employers.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Before we take the next question, I want to turn it over. We have a little poll for people to take. We're going to see about our audience in a little flash poll here. So I invite my friend Christine Choppy to think about that civic search. Throw up the slide. Here we go, everyone. Quick poll. How do you use your voice in engagement? What is the way you personally currently engage? Select all that apply. Let's see how you all did against our national survey. So go ahead, select your answers, and we'll count it down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Christine, go ahead and show the people what they've won. What I love about this, and thank you everyone who responded, is how we are a microcosm of the data on many levels, right? Look about that, the energy and enthusiasm around voting, followed closely by volunteerism. I think incredibly interesting, and really talks to the fullness of civic life that is represented in that civic circle. Thank you. And, Carol, clearly we are all still in the heart of dealing with COVID-19. Vaccine is months off at best still. And so, it's going to be with us for the next 6 to 12 months. What does that mean for engagement, right? We see people are engaged, but is that going to stick? Is that going to stay around? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I think that we need to find ways that are virtual. I know there's a lot of interest in it, so that we can not wait for another year, but we can truly learn to use a new muscle, per se. I think that for Gen Z, this is very natural. I really want to draw our listeners' attention to the number one thing that Gen Z was doing, because I've been doing research since 1993. I've done about 30 pieces of research. And way back when we were saying, well, if a company was involved in a social issue, I would likely, pay attention to and maybe buy from. Gen Z is saying clearly here that they are, using all of their communications, and they are finding out, what does a company stand for? And because they have so many choices to buy from. So to me, this research absolutely, it validated that response. And so I think that, again, the Civic Circle shows the comprehensive view of what a company is doing. And so it's products, it's sourcing, it's volunteerism, and recruiting and retention is absolutely critical. And Gen Z has spoken there as well. That 41% was a big number, and it's only going to go up.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's just so interesting. And it's not just that recruiting is important, but for Gen Z, your CSR and your civic engagement platform matters to them in that part of their decision making, as well as when they step outside of your office and become a consumer and how they're choosing products and services. Yeah.
And if I can add to that, I just want to say that, in activism, and it doesn't have to be radical, but it's acting, it's taking actions, which is really important. The other thing for both sides, corporates and not-for-profits, you are allowed and permitted to communicate what you're doing. No more time for humility. You can have your recipients talking about you. Your employees want to know and share, so that this circle of communication and action is closed, so people can take action based on good information.
Yeah.
Hey, Carol, I'd like to build on that. When you say that people want to get involved and we should be involved virtually, one of the things that we learned, and Jenny knows this, is that since the global pandemic, over 75% of our affiliates that are in over 200 cities in 37 countries have said that the demand for their support and their engagement and the demand in their community has grown. And so a couple of things that we've seen young people just in September. We recognize the Venkat sisters who are engaged in their community in serving the homeless and doing a lot of different things. But we also recently, just this past September, worked with Alexion, and they had a week of service, a full week, where they engaged 428 employees in virtual activities. And the range of virtual activities was great. And so I'll share with you a few of the ways that their employees were volunteering. One, of course, they wrote letters to the elderly. They had virtual music lessons and bingo games, right? And so there was engagement with seniors. Their employees also created STEM workshops with children at an orphanage. They made masks. They were involved in mentoring sessions with youth. They were involved in skills-based volunteering with nonprofits and their leaders. And they also made videos of encouragement for seniors and patients at local hospitals. And so why is this important? It's important because it demonstrates concrete ways that companies are engaging their employees. It's good for team building, it's good for staff morale. It demonstrates that a company actually cares about their employees and getting their employees engaged, as well as the community. And then, as the research shows, it's actually good for the person who is volunteering. And so what we're seeing is that the need continues to rise and people continue to step up and be engaged.
Yeah, that's right. And, I think we've seen throughout the data today, and even our own little flash poll, right, that next moment of engagement is around the election and the elections process and voting, right? So we're 2 weeks out. What does this research say to you in this moment, Carol?
Get out and vote. And vote early. I like to build on something that Natalie said, because I was helping on a pro bono basis one of the Parkland survivors, Sari Kaufman, and she has gotten over 300 of her Gen Z cohorts to create a site in Florida, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania of 300 candidates, nonpartisan, and their points of view. And I think that voting, you need to be an educated voter. And that's what Sari and it's the myvoteproject.com. You can go there. And it's like the down ballot is as important as the voting for president and vice president. Because in your local community, the down ballot can have a huge impact on local issues. But it takes time. You got to spend some time to understand if there's referendum or individuals so that you are informed. So be an informed early voter.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And Natalie, I know you are talking to many organizations all across the country and around the world around civic engagement right now. As we sit just 14 days out from an election, what are you seeing?
Well, I would echo Carol's comments, which is voting is important. But if you've already voted, like I'm a person, I voted early in Georgia, so I'm one of the 10 million who's already cast her vote. There still are other ways that you can get involved. You can be a poll worker, you can drive someone to the polls. You can, distribute water to individuals who are in lines. You can bring supplies to them, let's just say chairs or blankets, or whatever you believe is helpful. There's a way for you to support. And then we want to remind people that November 3rd isn't a panacea. There's no magic about that date and problems in your community will disappear. There are still ways and time for an interest and opportunity for people to get engaged after that. And we would encourage everyone to continue to be involved.
Yeah, absolutely right. So, and I do want to give a shout out our partners at Civic Alliance, civicalliance.org. We are working with them to share all sorts of ideas for how you can engage on election day. So it's not too late to matter to your community in that moment, and invite you to check that out for sure. So before we switch to Q&A, I thought I would do my little version of Q&A, which is one more poll. So Christine, if you could put up the final poll of today. When you think about Points of Light Civic Circle, what will you do more of in the future? How do you see your civic engagement evolving as we move from today forward? We'll make this a quick one. So everybody quickly click the boxes that seem relevant to you, and we will count it down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Christine, what do we see? Yeah, see, yeah, so volunteering becomes back to the lead in importance, and we encourage everyone to jump in and do that. The next 2, 3, 4 years are going to take and need all of us to really get our communities back on track and really make the progress that we're all hoping for. And we encourage you, however, to keep voting. And as Carol said, that down ballot vote really does make a difference. So I think we're going to move to Q&A here just a second. So I'm going to invite Jay Campbell and actually Diane Quest, if she's available, to come back and put yourself on screen a minute, and we'll take Q&A. So there was one question in the box that was about those virtual volunteering opportunities, which is where can people find more opportunities for virtual volunteering? And I'm so glad to have the answer, pointsoflight.org/volunteer. You can find virtual volunteering right away. And other Q&A, let's see what we've got. Let's see what we've got. What is down ballot? So Carol, you want to talk to people a little bit more about what is down ballot?
Down ballot are all of those local decisions that you get to make. In Florida here, the agriculture commissioner is really important because of the environment, or it's local judges. Should they stay on the bench? So, and you've got to like dig. And, the My Vote Project has some, but there's also many other places that you can dig. So it took me, 2-3 hours on a Saturday for my mail-in ballot, which I'm going to physically take down to my local voting at the library today, which opens today in Florida, and I'm going to put it in the box.
That's great. Thanks, Carol. There's some specific questions, Diana. Maybe you can jump in here about engage.pointsoflight.org, or what used to be known as All for Good, and just a little bit about how people can populate and find volunteer opportunities.
Sure. So it is important to say that engage.pointsoflight.org is the next iteration of All for Good, which many of you are familiar with, which is a marketplace where you search and discover opportunities, and where, if you're a nonprofit or another organization, you can also post your opportunities for volunteers. We do have a filter set on Engage that allows you to search for remote and virtual opportunities, and we started that at the beginning of the pandemic. And that is an ongoing engagement for us to continually improve the way that feature works. As you know, some remote or virtual volunteer opportunities can be done from your home anywhere, and then the benefit can impact a nonprofit in your community or one that's far away. And some are much more local, where you do a project at home, and then it is for a specific nonprofit in your community. So we're continually looking for ways. So what I would say is, if you're a nonprofit organization and you have those opportunities, to please set up your profile if you haven't done that already in the system, and post those opportunities. And we're going to keep filling that pipeline the best that we can. We've also posted a number of what we call DIY volunteer opportunities. Again, those that you can do at home with your family, and then package up and drop off or send to organizations that will benefit from that work from home.
That's great, Diane. Thanks. Natalie, this question over to you. There's a question about that intersection between nonprofits and communities and companies. And what's your recommendation to nonprofits for getting involved with companies in their community?
Well, the first recommendation would be is to survey your Chamber of Commerce. And so many large and small companies are engaged in the Chamber of Commerce. The second recommendation would be to look at your board and look at the influencers and map the connections of your board members and see whether or not they can make some introductions for you. And then the third would be to maximize the assets of your volunteers. Many volunteers are employees and leaders for companies that are in your community. And so if you would ask those volunteers for help or support, I'm sure that that would be helpful as well.
And Carol, to you, any thoughts for that nexus between maybe the role that companies can play in really finding those community partners?
Well, certainly they're a great place to find them, but I want to reiterate skilled volunteerism and the work from home phenomenon. I mean, people like it, but they're separated from their colleagues. They're separated from the water cooler. And there are so many great skills that corporate employees have. You know, whether it's creating job descriptions or helping with technology for a not-for-profit, or helping with communications, or writing materials. And I think that gives a respite to someone working at home and they're grinding away and then they're balancing with their kids or their pets or such. And then they have that moment of people helping people. I just want to underscore, when we did the qual and we did the quant, the very simple act, the humane act of people wanting to help people was totally rose to the top. And so if you look at, again, our times, our mental health needs, our fear, our anxiety, taking that moment to help a local not-for-profit is going to make your employees feel really, really good and calmer. And they're going to get something done. And so making a big contribution, it could be a very small not-for-profit, but an important contribution to their growth.
Yeah, I think especially in these times, right, that people just need to feel like they're doing something positive and helpful, and something that's just outside their daily work. And you know, civic engagement, from sewing masks to you know, to showing up in person, even in food banks, and we advise that to be with all precautions and following all guidelines in the safest way possible. But people do have that need to really do something in this moment, and I think that's really meaningful. you know, one of the things, and Natalie, to you, I think, and then Carol, maybe as a follow-up, a great question, which is like, what do you think companies are going to do with this data, right? As they see this demand from Gen Z for engagement, how is that going to change how companies think about their role as civic leaders?
Sure. Well, I would hope that companies would take this data back and discuss it with their peers and the various teams to dissect it, to see what it actually means to them, to incorporate some of the information into their strategic plans, and really recognize that if it matters to your employees, it matters to you. If it matters to your customers, it matters to you. Yeah. And what this research says, and I believe Carol was one of the first ones who lifted it up, is that this generation, today's consumer is an educated consumer, and they are requiring their companies to do more than provide a service or a product. They are requiring their companies to be engaged.
Yeah, I think this is a cohesive way to tie civic circle to business. And, you know, you see a lot of surveys. I've done them, others have done them, but this is an opportunity to take your CHRO and your head of marketing and your head of the foundation and some other leaders and come together and just say, this is real. And how do we take what we currently have and how do we knit it together? And I think, again, not only community engagement and asking your employees what they want to do, which is really important, but then capturing the stories and allowing them the permission to tell the stories, because they are the most transparent and honest and compelling, showing your values in action. And so I think that, you know, we've all had to learn so much from a new world with COVID. But I think we're not perfect anymore. We don't have to be perfect, but we need to take our core capabilities and leverage them in a positive way.
Yeah, Carol, absolutely. So as wrap up, Jay, I'm going to start with you and then go around. I would love to ask you to answer one of two questions. One is, what is the one thing you want people to take away from this research? And the other alternative is, where do we go from here? What are the unanswered questions that you would like to see answered in our next survey? I invite people in the chat or in the Q&A to throw their unanswered questions for the next round into it as well. Jay, start with you.
I will opt to answer the second question about unanswered questions. I don't know that it's unanswered so much as does it prove to be the case that now that we are well into the new normal of COVID, if people's level of enthusiasm and desired level of engagement is as high as they predicted it would be in our research, as the poll at the beginning of this call indicated people think it will be, have we been able to maintain that enthusiasm and desire for activism is, I think, the key question in my mind.
Terrific. Thanks. Carol?
Said by a true researcher. So I would say that local, that one of the key data points in that research that made my heart go pitter patter was that if we dropped the barriers, if we made it easier, so corporations make it easier, not-for-profits make it easier, using simple online zip code enabled, what's my interest, drop the barriers, that it said that over 30 million more people would say, I'm interested. So we all live in our local communities. We've all seen the small businesses going, you know, out of business. We're looking at, you know, local food and farming. We're looking at needs in healthcare. It's about local. And I believe, Jay, that if we as corporates and not-for-profits come together and show easy ways locally to get involved with family and friends, and also there's another key point, communicate back the impact. People want to know, close the loop, the impact. I think that we're going to see a tremendous amount of increased civic engagement.
Thanks, Carol. And Natalie, we'll let you have the last word on this topic.
Thanks, Jenny. First, I do want to thank you and Diane and the Points of Light team for leading this work, and for our wonderful partners, Carol Cohn on Purpose and Jay at Hart Associates. Your expertise is how we are able to bring forward a lot of this intelligence, and so thank you for your partnership. What I would recommend is, and I say this often, is about the power of one. It's one person taking one idea, one concept, and really digging into that. We are all on Zoom several times a day. We are unpacking a lot of data. And so what do you do with all of that? Please visit our website, pointsoflight.org, and pull down the research, and then look at what one issue really speaks to you, really resonates with you, and take action on that.
Great.
Those are great words to close out. We thank everyone for joining us today. You will receive the recording of this afterwards, an opportunity to download the recording of this and listen again and share it externally. If you're interested in having this research presented to your organization, please reach out through info@pointsoflight.org. We can follow up with you there, and invite you to download the research from pointsoflight.org. So thank you all so much for joining us today. We look forward to talking with you more about the research. Again, thanks to Jay Campbell at Hart Research and to Carol Cohn from Carol Cohn on Purpose. Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.